Hello, hello. This is Postgres FM. As usual, I'm Nick, Postgres AI, and as usual, my co-host is Michael, PG Mustard. Hi, Michael. How are you?
Hello, Nick. I'm good. How are you?
Very good. So the topic you chose is to talk about like beyond Postgres, when we should avoid using Postgres, right?
Yeah, you put a shout out on a few social networks asking people what kind of questions they'd like us to answer. And we had lots of good suggestions, as we've had for many years now. And one of them was particularly good, and I thought was worth a whole episode, which was, yeah, when not to use Postgres. I think there's a growing trend of, or a few popular blog posts of people saying you should consider Postgres for most workloads these days. And I think it is still an interesting topic to discuss. Are there cases where it doesn't make sense? If so, what are those, and when does it make sense not to use Postgres? And I thought I was interested in your take on some of these as well.
Yeah. Well, classic example is analytics, of course.
Yeah. Do you want to list a few and then discuss them in a bit more detail, or just want to?
Yeah, let's create a frame of this episode, right? So analytics, embedded databases.
Yeah.
What
So
else?
and I think analytics. Yeah. So analytics embedded. I think storing large objects. There are some cases where it makes sense,
Pictures
but I
in
think
database.
exactly, especially larger ones like videos, like very large objects, 100%.
And just let's agree, in every area we can discuss pros and cons of using
Yeah.
Postgres, because some people will definitely have opinion that it's not an excuse to avoid Postgres. Let me
Yeah.
add then, with this in mind, let me add then a topic like ML data sets and pipelines,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Machine learning and big data. Yeah.
I think anything where there's specialized databases like search,
Yeah.
vector databases.
Vectors, exactly. Let's talk about
Yeah.
vectors separately. It's worth it.
And then one more, which I think, well, actually, I had two more on my list. One was potentially controversial. I wondered if there's a case if you're at extreme OLTP
Right heavy,
at
maybe,
the
right?
very, very right heavy, and you, like, let's say you've got institutional experience with Vitess. I think sticking with that for the moment makes a lot of sense. So, when not to use Postgres, I wondered if like a new project came along, starting with Vitess while we get these sharded Postgres, like OLTP sharding Postgres solutions up and running. I think at the moment, maybe it still makes sense to not use Postgres there.
Let's add then time series.
Yeah.
Let's discuss this area, time series. Yeah, and also data that can be compressed really well.
Yeah.
This topic is close to analytics, although.
True.
Right?
Yeah. And then I had one more, but I guess it's kind of what I said just now. I think if you or your organization have tons of experience with another database, the argument for using Postgres for your next project is weaker. I'm not sure it's like when not to use Postgres. I think I could think of lots of
Well, this is
counterexamples.
orthogonal
Yeah,
discussion. You can say if we already have huge contract with Oracle, we
yeah,
already signed for next 5 years. It's not wise to start using Postgres, and those money will be spent for nothing, right? There are many such
yeah. Okay,
reasons, right?
should we stick to technical ones then?
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
like area, like types of usage area,
mhm.
queue-like workloads, I would add.
Yeah,
Our favorite,
interesting.
right?
Yeah,
Queue-like
yeah, yeah,
workloads. Last one is like kind of Kafka territory, or there are others, of course, but yeah,
yeah. All right, should we start with analytics then? I feel like that's.
yeah.
I know
Let's
we did
do
a
it.
whole episode, kind of a
Yeah,
whole episode on
yeah,
this.
yeah. So raw store is not good for analytics, and select count will always be slow. You need denormalization or estimates. Estimates will be slow, well, not slow, not too rough and too wrong sometimes. Yeah, it sucks.
Yeah, but I think there's a scale. Like I think we talked about this before, but there's a scale up to which you'll be fine on Postgres. you could achieve better performance elsewhere. But if you have hybrid, a lot of systems now are hybrid, right? Like they have to be transactional, but they have to provide some analytics dashboard for users or something like it. But they still want real-time data. They still want transactional processing. Maybe 90 to 95, maybe even 99% of the workload's transactional, and only like there's a few analytical queries from time to time. I still think those make a ton of sense on Postgres.
Counts everyone needs, right? Pure LTP applications, they need to show counts or understand pagination and still have counts. If you think about social media, you need to show how many likes, comments, and so on, reposts. So
yeah,
and to implement it in purely in Postgres, a good way for generalization would be needed.
Yeah.
And also there are so many rakes lying around this, you can easily step on them and have hotspot. This classic hotspot when counting system like tracking balances, and let's say we have whole balance and all transactions update with single row.
Yeah.
So this is where it can be an issue, but at the same time there are many attempts to do better, and some attempts led to companies being acquired, right?
Yes.
I mean Crunchy. Yeah, there are many new waves of aiming to solve this problem, better analytics for Postgres. I see two big trends right now. One trend is how Sid, founder of GitLab, recently had a post saying that Postgres and ClickHouse is a great couple of database systems. I don't remember exact title of that post, but the idea is that it's great. They go together very, very well.
Yeah.
We also had Sai, founder of PeerDB, which was acquired by ClickHouse. And I met with him last week, and we talked about, again, the same basically idea that ClickHouse and Postgres are great together.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one direction. Another direction is saying ClickHouse is very different, and not even maintaining is absolutely different task, but also using it requires different mindset and skills. So it's better to choose, for example, DuckDB, do everything inside Postgres, but in a smarter way. This is what some multiple companies worked on recently, and one of them, Crunchy, was acquired by Snowflake.
And we did an episode on pgDuckDB as well, so a slightly different approach on that. But the Crunchy one's interesting because all the queries go through Postgres, but a lot of the data's stored in Iceberg or some other file format. Yeah, exactly. Getting the columnar side. Yeah. So this definitely feels like one of those ones. There's also a third option, which is these massively parallel databases Well, I was at you spoke to Sai last week. I was at a UK event this week, and there was presentation from the successors of the Greenplum project, the open source successors, which is called Cloudberry. It looks like really interesting work, but that's another way of doing some analytics from within Postgres, kind of.
Yeah, and from previous experience from the past, I remember cases when Postgres and Greenplum was combined in one project, and it was great, and it was some bank, even quite big one bank.
Mm-hmm.
And but somehow I stopped looking at Greenplum for quite long already. I don't know. It's there are also, of course, commercial databases. I remember Vertica. There is Snowflake, super popular. It's a major player in this area. By the way, I would distinguish two areas of analytics. One is internal needs. For company, we need to understand how business is doing, a lot of stuff. We need a lot of reports. And another need is we need to show our users some counts, like I said, on social media. So two big areas, I think, also.
Yeah, right? Good point.
In the first case, users are internal. In the second case, users are external. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of mixed cases, additional cases, but I personally like these two directions. Of course, there are others. There is also Redshift on AWS.
Yeah.
Right? or
Also originally based on Postgres,
yeah. So there are many options here.
So yeah, is the short version at sufficient scale? It probably doesn't make sense to be using Postgres at this point for analytics, but like that level is quite high.
Yeah, but also I see cases when companies go to Snowflake, then try to escape it.
Come back, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So
That's fine.
going to Snowflake, it's like going to Oracle, in my opinion.
You mean like in terms of financial?
In terms of
or-
vendor lock-in and
Vendor
so
lock-in,
on, yeah, because it's just purely commercial offering.
Mhm.
There are of course many tempting things there, features, performance.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Nice
integrations.
product to use as well, yeah, developer friendly.
Yeah, well, users love it. I agree.
Mhm.
But if we try to remain in more open source and vendor lock-in less, then it's like it should be excluded. Even ClickHouse, like ClickHouse is open source itself.
Yep. Right. What you mentioned time series being quite close to this, so I feel like we
Yeah.
should jump to that next. What do you reckon?
Well, Timescale DB is great, but it's also kind of vendor lock-in because it's not open. Yeah.
Yeah.
So-
Because of their license, other cloud providers can't provide timescale as a service easily,
Yeah.
or at least not the version with lots of nice features.
Yeah, in Timescale Cloud, I had a recent case where we saw limitations again very badly, like create database doesn't work, and moreover, lack of observability tooling. Like again, like I keep promoting on this podcast, if guys who build platforms listen to us, you must add PG weight sampling. Unless you are RDS, okay. But even in case of RDS, we talked about this, like it's great to have it in SQL context and be able to combine weight event analysis with regular PG statements analysis. And PG.kcache, additional very good observability point. Because I had a case when guys just compared everything, saw worse performance, worked closely with timescale. But in case of RDS, you see performance insights, understand where we wait, right? In case of timescale, only a rare collection of samples from PGist activity is possible. It's sometimes good enough, but it's quite rough tool to analyze performance. So yes, such things are lacking. And unfortunately, more and more I come into conclusion that when I recommend Timescale DB to customers, it contradicts with the idea they want to stay on managed service.
Yeah. Yeah. Because they're down to a
Unfortunately.
single choice. Yeah.
That being said, the Timescale Cloud even offered me like some bounty if I convince someone to go to them, and this is great. Like I love loyalty programs, but I need to be fair. Some big pieces are missing, unfortunately.
Yep.
Yeah.
And again, Postgres even without timescale can be used for good time series like workloads up to a certain point. We're just talking about at very high scale, right? Where all the features like compression, like continuous aggregates,
Exactly.
like automatic partition.
Straight to the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, by the way, for time series, ClickHouse also is still a good option, and there is also Victoria Metrics, right?
Well, and I learned just yesterday about even Cloudberry have incrementally updated materialized views. I need to look into it, but that's quite cool. And if you're maybe that would be.
What do you think about this? Wouldn't it be great to have in Postgres something like update materialize view where you just define the scope, and also concurrently?
We should do a whole episode. I think there are several projects that have started to look into incrementally updated materialized views, and I think they're more complicated than it's like one of those topics. The more you learn about it, the harder you realize it is.
Right now, I'm in a position where most, not everyone, but most of our customers are on managed Postgres, so it's really hard for me to look at extensions which are not available on RDS, Cloud SQL, and others.
I understand. I'm just I think it's worth learning from the extensions as to what would be needed
course,
in
yeah.
core. Like what did they try? What was difficult about that? And it's not just extensions, right? There are whole companies that have been built on the premise of is it called
Like,
was it Materialise or like what was
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. I haven't heard for a few years from them. What's like, I'm curious what's happening there. Lack of autonomous transactions will be an issue, right?
yeah well,
Or queue like tool inside Postgres. So asynchronously update would be propagated through queue like if everyone had PGQ like Cloud SQL has from Skype, developed 20 years ago. In this case, implementing incrementally asynchronously updated materialized views would be easy.
well yeah, async and sync is anyway. This is
This is an interesting
topic.
topic. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And we just touched workloads, queue-like workloads. It's still hard. Bloat
Yeah.
is an issue, right? We discussed it, I think.
I think
And
we've discussed there are solutions, right? I actually think queues is one of the ones that I was gonna fight you hardest on. Like I think there are ways to do it badly within Postgres,
yeah,
and again at extreme scale. I think it wouldn't be smart to put it in, especially. Not
I
in
don't
your
agree.
main-
Skype had extreme scale.
Yeah, well, yeah, okay.
20 years
point.
ago,
So-
1 billion users was a target. 1 billion users.
Yeah,
20
good
years
point.
ago.
So maybe actually that of all the ones that we added to potentially be on the list, that would be one where I think if you manage it well, like PGQ at Skype did
Yeah.
with partitions, actually I think you like that's not an excuse to not use Postgres if that's the title.
Yeah, and benefits are serious. Problem is like when I recommend keep queue-like workloads inside Postgres, I just say like understanding whole complexity and hidden issues that you just need a high level of understanding of what's happening to have it.
Yeah.
But if you have it, it will be great. It will be great. It's just not a small project, unfortunately, usually.
Yeah, good
No.
point.
And this recent case with Notify as well, because it's also sometimes used in such workloads. Yeah.
Yeah.
As a reminder, Notify exclusive lock on database, serializing all notifies, makes it basically not scalable.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Anyway, like, what's the answer? Like, if you needed to create a project and you would need to think about analytics, think about okay, we will have terabytes of data very soon, fast growing. What do we choose for analytics? What do we choose for queue-like workloads, for time series? What are the choices you would make?
I think it does depend a lot. Like you already said with analytics, are we talking about a bank that is doing nightly loads of data and only cares about internal reporting, or are we talking about a user-facing web app that has to do, or like a social media app that has to do counts and various aggregations that are user-facing?
Well, you need both. You need to think about both and what architecture choice would you make in the beginning.
Yeah.
For target of terabytes of data in 1 year, for example, 10 terabytes in 1 year, what would you do? Would you choose stay in Postgres?
I'm a big fan of simplicity. I think I would stick with Postgres for until it was painful.
Okay, re-engineer then. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that would be painful, but that would be my preferred option.
Yeah.
I think then I am tempted. I think it's quite new at the moment, but I am tempted by the work that Crunchy started on moving data out to Iceberg format and still querying it from Postgres. Like I like that I can keep queries going from the same
Cloud
place.
SQL or RDS, right?
Not yet, right? But I think it's quite early. Like if I was starting a project today, I would hope that they caught up by then. And if not, then a ClickHouse, like a whatever PeerDB is called now within ClickHouse, like having that go out to an analytics system like ClickHouse makes a load of sense to me. What do you think?
Yeah. I would choose self-managed Postgres 100%. And I would use Timescale DB full-fledged.
Got it. Okay, yeah.
And then I would consider DuckDB path as well, additionally at some point. And Q-like workloads, I would engineer perfectly and squeeze as much as Postgres can.
Yeah.
And what else we touched?
So again, all of these you're actually sticking with Postgres, and then just at some point in the future, you're going to have to think about sharding if you
Only
get
in one,
absolutely huge.
only one reason would make me do it.
Go
So
on.
I wouldn't go in these three areas we just discussed. I wouldn't
Yeah.
go away from Postgres. Although I understand very well customers who we have and why they say we need ClickHouse or something. In my company, I would add ClickHouse only if there is a strong team which needs it. And this is their choice, and I delegate, and then I'm not involved in this decision. But while this choice is still mine, I would stick to Postgres and just make it work better.
Yeah.
And can scale until IPO.
Yeah.
I saw it several times with several companies. So, yeah.
Cool. Makes sense. So I wonder if this next one's going to be the first one where we both would and don't use Postgres, which is the storing large objects, like large files.
Well, definitely. Last time I tried to store a picture inside Postgres was probably 2006 or 7 when I was just exploring, like, oh, this is working, okay. But no, I even don't know what will happen, like this piece of Postgres I touch super rarely,
Yeah. I think the one exception is text-based stuff, stuff that like you might want to query it, but even then, like you probably want to be doing. Pardon me?
PDFs, yeah.
But it's like some representation of the PDF, not the actual PDF, but like the text extracted from, like it's going to be some...
or it can be markdown, and then we have Pandoc or something which converts to both to HTML and PDF. This is what we do with our checkups. Originally, it's in Markdown.
Yeah, and by the way, and another possible exception I think is almost not worth discussing is if you only need to store 5 pictures, like maybe, but I just don't. I don't see many cases like that.
Yeah. Still,
cool. All right.
Still, yeah. We recently implemented attachments in our own system for pictures and various like archives of logs or something which customers upload, or we upload PDFs as well sometimes. And of course we store them in GCS and in secure manner, not in Postgres. 100% no.
Yeah.
I even don't think there. Yeah, it's just exercise for those who probably don't have other tasks.
Yeah. All right. Another one that I think is maybe in between these two, like advanced search. I still think there are cases, like there are search use cases where people that I respect and trust would still choose Elasticsearch over Postgres, even though they know.
By the way, sorry for interrupting.
Yeah.
I just realized you talked about blobs. Yeah, but we also can. So, and this can be an issue at upgrades, I've heard, right? At major upgrades. I don't see them recently at all. So I mean, you can try to store it in Postgres, but then you have some operational issues additionally, because not only I don't see them often. People who design some procedures and tools, they also don't see them often, and it's kind of exotic to have blobs.
Yeah. So when you say major upgrades, are we talking about like the speed of the initial sync, or are we talking about like PG dump? If we're going the dump restore route, then actually it's all having to get dumped out.
Yeah. I just remember some notes about it I saw maybe on RDS, and specifically about large objects. Maybe I'm wrong, actually.
I just remembered I'm actually using it not for super large objects, but several kilobyte files. Like we store query plans that are in JSON format or text format. Text format ones don't tend to get that massive, but JSON format ones can be hundreds of. Well, we've actually seen a couple that were tens of megabytes. I think 1 or 2 that are in the hundreds of. Like,
we need to amend this part of episode. You are talking about Varlena types.
Yeah.
There is a special thing, large object facility, special chapter.
Yes, sorry, that's
Right.
a different. Yeah.
Yeah, well, Varlen, everyone uses JSONs, large text, well, everyone. Even byte arrays.
Okay, you mean there's a
Yeah.
specific issue with the thing called large objects?
I
with
cannot say I
compressions?
don't touch large JSONs. Of course, I touch them a lot. We
Yeah.
have them a lot, and yeah, we talk about how they toast in Postgres.
Yeah. In
Large
Toast, yeah.
JSONs, large XMLs sometimes, right? Texts, of course, large texts, everything. For example, our RAG system for AI assistant has a really large text, chunks of source code
Yeah.
or mailing lists, discussions, kilobytes.
And you put all of those in Postgres.
Of course, because we need to parse them and also full text search and vectors. It's everything in Postgres right now.
Well, you don't. You could store the vectors in Postgres without storing the text in Postgres, but the full text search makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I understand you, but we do everything in Postgres,
Yeah.
even vectorization. It's maybe
Yeah,
it doesn't
okay,
scale well if you need to deal with billions of vectors, but millions it's fine.
Makes sense.
So what I was talking about is it's like allow create function. These things.
Yeah, I've not used that, and you're saying you don't see it. Yeah.
Yeah, this is what I don't see. Yeah.
Hopefully, everyone got the memo, and no one's using it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Allow from byte. So yeah, I don't use those. And again, last time I touched that, it was so long ago. Actual blobs. Or
Yeah, perfect.
LO underscore. LO put, LO get, these functions.
Cool.
I have no idea, and I suspect something will be broken if you start using them. Some operations like upgrade maybe. Well, not broken, but you will need to take care of them, like like some side effects like table spaces can have, you know. Recently not used also often. If in cloud context we don't use often the table spaces, but table spaces might be headache when you do some migrations, move your database from place to place or upgrade and so on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, good one.
What else?
Have we talked? We haven't talked about embedded databases yet, on the kind of tiny scale of things.
I'm not an expert in embedded databases. I've heard SQLite is good.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, in this category, we do now have PG Lite. Looks like a very
Yeah.
interesting project.
Yeah.
But I think at the moment, unless I was doing some syncing between Postgres, unless I had a really good reason, I'd probably still default to SQLite or SQLite, however the community pronounces it. But actually, I was going to include in this topic, like even browser local storage, for example. If you're wanting to do stuff client side in like a browser app or web app, still makes sense to use the local storage there, right? IndexedDB or whatever. So there are like a few embedded cases where I don't think it makes sense to use Postgres, or if you're going to try, maybe PG Lite.
And can you remind me, PGLite, what does it like? What does it do? And is it related somehow to WebAssembly and so on? I think yes, right?
I think it must be, right, but I don't know. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, it's complete. I'm checking. It's complete awesome build of Postgres that
Yeah.
it's under 3 megabytes zipped. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's
Really
a cool
impressive.
project, but I guess there's an argument to say it's not actually Postgres, right? Like it talks and behaves like Postgres, but it's kind of its own thing.
Well, we can talk about many Postgres variants
Yeah.
like this, including Aurora and so on. Some of them
Yes.
more Postgres, some of them less.
Yeah. But if the topic is like when not to use Postgres, yeah, I guess Aurora. I don't know if I count Aurora as that or not. Anyway.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
If the only solution was use Aurora,
Mm-hmm.
let's say there was like one of these cases. It turns out Aurora was the absolute best for and way better than native Postgres. I think I would count that as when not to use Postgres, because it's kind of Postgres compatible, like, or Cockroach, like, or any of these kind of compatible, or Yugabyte.
DB.
Yeah, I'd say Well, AlloyDB, yeah, you're right. It's kind of a scale. It's hard to like draw a line where it is and isn't.
It's a spectrum, Postgres
Yeah,
spectrum.
yeah. Cool. Okay. But yeah, it feels like that's an easy one, right? If you've got little devices or little sensors, for
Yeah,
example.
default choice is SQLite already,
Mm-hmm,
and I like the idea of PGLite, and I know Supabase used it for database.build project, which I
Yes.
like a lot. With like merging this with AI and right in browser, you can create pet projects and maybe like explore, and it's very creative tool to think about, to bootstrap some new project, think how it could look like. It has the AR diagram, and you can iterate with AI. It's great, and their PGLite works really well. And I'm sure I'm sure they already created, right, this ability to deploy, to sync what you built to real Postgres in Supabase or somewhere, right?
Well, I think that was the main aim of the company behind PGLite. Called like Electric SQL or something.
Replication.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the whole premise was local. Have you heard of local first development? So
Yeah.
the idea, like apps like Linear, the task management tool, they're like lightning fast because they do everything locally and then sync.
Very thick client. Very thick.
Yes.
Client. Basically like Git, Git clone. When you when you type Git clone and execute it, it's basically a whole repository. It can live on your machine.
Yeah.
Distributed fashion, right?
Well, and it has to handle merges. Yeah.
You commit there. It's
And
great.
conflicts. Yeah.
I'm curious if we could explore better branching in that area, because we're already very close to implementing a synchronization between two DB Lab engines. Yeah, but it's a different story.
Yeah.
I like the idea. So it might be a foundation for PGLite. I mean, might be a foundation for more apps which will live in browser, but then be synchronized with real Postgres. Right.
Yeah, or even desktop apps. Like it doesn't have to be browser based.
Well, I guess the desktop apps built on top of using Electron, right? Which
Oh
is
no!
also-
Yeah, good point. Good point. Oh.
And then if you don't have internet connection, you still can work.
Yeah.
It's like offline mode. That's great. I like the idea, actually. I like the idea. So you have Postgres mirror. Postgres. Well, it reminds me of multi-master replication. This is complexity.
All the same problems, like with merging and conflicts.
Yeah. But at the same time, recent Postgres has this ability to create subscription and avoid loops of replication.
Yeah, true.
So origin something you can say, I want to replicate on the data which doesn't have origin, which means it was born here. Local origin, basically, but means no origin there somehow. Terminology is strange a little bit, as usual in Postgres, right? But it's great ability to break the loops, infinite loops. Yeah, it's
it fixes one of the problems, but it doesn't. Yeah,
like all of them conflicts.
Yeah, exactly, and
I
or
agree.
like last right win type things. Yeah.
But if you need to have a very good like server-side application and so on, you choose Postgres. But then you have this very thick clients, and you need to choose database for them, and you choose SQLite. Then you need to synchronize between them somehow. It's maybe even worse.
Even harder. I think that's the
Different
point.
data types
Yeah.
and models.
Yeah. Cool. What about the specialized
Vectors.
workloads like vectors? And I was going to bring up search as well. I think search is slightly easier.
Let's bring search.
I haven't written an app or been involved in an application that is heavily reliant on like very advanced search features. But the people I speak to that have swear by how good Elasticsearch is, and
This is also
yeah.
this is also what I see. I touch Elastic only usually working with some logs, application logs, Postgres logs through Kibana, so ELK, or how is it called, this stack. But I also see many customers use Elastic and like it, and shift from full text search Postgres. There, okay, their choice, right? And I know limitations of Postgres native full text search.
Yeah.
I don't understand ParadeDB, and I
Well,
haven't
that's an
seen
interesting one.
benchmarks. The benchmark I saw was only in the
Yeah.
beginning when they didn't create index on TS vector column.
They made a really interesting hire recently. I saw. Do you remember
Hires,
ZomboDB?
yes.
Do you remember? So
Several
yeah,
hires because they raised money, yeah. But where are benchmarks? So I
Yeah.
don't understand what's there because I don't see benchmarks. I tried
Yeah.
recently because their CEO founder Philip approached me
nice.
and maybe asking asking for, I guess, like to spread the word, but I cannot spread the word if I don't see numbers.
Yeah.
If
fair.
it's about performance company, show numbers. I might be missing something because
Well,
so
the other product in this space for Postgres was an extension called ZomboDB,
Right.
which synchronized, which kept a Elasticsearch index maintained, but the data coming from Postgres originally. So I thought that was a really fascinating way of having both. A bit like when we talked about analytics, like having the interface be from Postgres, but the actual query being run on something that isn't Postgres. So that was fascinating, and it was the founder of that ZomboDB that recently joined Parade. So that seems interesting as like a way.
This whole story seems interesting. I don't understand it because I cannot find numbers. At the same time, I see everyone mentions them. A lot of blog posts, a lot of GitHub stars, a lot of a lot of noise. But where are the numbers and benchmarks? So they removed it after the initial ones.
Yeah, what would be so that if you were to try and stay within Postgres, they seem like the obvious thing to try, but I still see people choosing Elasticsearch, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah. If someone listening to us can share benchmarks showing how ParadeDB is behaving under load, some number of rows, some number of queries, like latencies, buffers used ideally, right? I would appreciate it because I'm stuck in question. What is this?
Cool.
Yeah.
What about vectors?
Vectors, I have a picture for you. I saw yesterday near my house. These guys definitely, those who can see YouTube, please check this out. So these guys are definitely experts in vector storage.
This is Nikolai's joking. It's like a removal company that are called Vector Moving and
Company.
Storage.
I saw storage as well. I thought it's funny. Yeah. So we have TurboPather, right?
Again, not Postgres, right?
Not Postgres at all, and not open source at all, and not free at all. Even no freemium. And data is in S3, and this new type of indexes is being used there. I already forgot the name, but so it's not HNSW.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I don't know it.
So HNSW doesn't scale beyond few million rows. DiskOn and we had Timescale Tiger Data guys who developed an advanced version of that. In my perception, I don't see what scales to billion rows at all. And TurboPather says they scale to billion rows, but as I understand, it's a multi-tenant approach. So it's not one set of billion vectors. I also don't understand that, but I see some development. The Planet Scale for MySQL, they implemented the same index. And this development started, I think, at Microsoft and maybe in China, actually. Microsoft in China, this is what I saw. And interesting, they choose Postgres for prototyping. So this area is worth additional research. I started it and didn't have time, unfortunately, but it's a very interesting direction. What's happening with vector search? Because I think Postgres is losing right now.
Well, you say losing. I think
it's losing 100%.
Well, bear with me. I think there are a lot of use cases that don't need the scale that you're talking about, and a lot of those are fine on Postgres with pgvector. But you're probably talking about the ones that then succeed and do really well and scale. They hit a limit relatively quickly, or like within the first couple of years.
It's really hard to maintain huge HNSW index, and latency wise it's not good. TurboPython, I'm not fully sold on that idea that let's store everything on S3. Speaking on S3, a few weeks ago they released S3 vectors. AWS released S3 vectors, and this might become mainstream. So S3 itself right now supports vector indexes. Have you heard about this?
No.
I think this might become mainstream. But
Okay.
If big change doesn't happen in Postgres ecosystem, it will be worse than the case with full text search and Elastic. It will be worse. I'm how it's called, like alarmist I am today, right?
Well, this is the point of the episode, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's almost by design that we're talking about the
I
weaknesses.
was feeling so good saying like I would choose Postgres for this, and this.
Yeah.
Like I can rely. But here, since we have 1.1 or 1.2 million vectors in our reg system for Postgres Postgres knowledge.
Is that mostly because of the mailing list? Yeah.
Mailing list, I think 70%, but we also have
Yeah.
a lot of pieces of source code of various versions, and not only
Sure.
Postgres, PGBouncer, and so on, and documentation. It's a lot of stuff. Also
yeah.
blog posts. And I feel not well thinking about how to add more. And we are going to add more. We are going to do 10x at some point. Of course, we will check what Tiger Data has, but at the same time, I'm feeling not well in terms of...
Is the main issue
I'm not
latency? Is it query latency, or what's the main? Okay, yeah.
Latency, index size, index build time, all these things.
Interesting.
Ability to have additional filter, which is and the HNSW still lacks, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
I do remember seeing an update on the pgvector repo, but I can't remember what. I feel like they
Yeah.
had something to address this, but I can't remember what.
I haven't touched this topic for several months. I might be already lagging in terms of updates. It's a very hot topic, of course, very young as well, right?
Yeah, and not something I'm experiencing again. It's more something I'm observing. So you're definitely way ahead of me on this.
Yeah. So I know just companies use. We have several customers who are on Postgres, but they choose TurboPython additionally. And Linear, you mentioned, for example. Cursor and Linear, they also chose TurboPython. Notion chose TurboPython to store vectors, right? I'm just checking.
They have
the
some
website.
cool customers on this list, yeah.
Yeah, and several more companies which not mentioned here we also mentioned, and they are our customers in terms of Postgres consulting, and I was super surprised to see that something is like massive migration of vectors is happening. Some moving company called TurboPython helped them move to their vectors to S3. But yeah, it's interesting, and they use some different index, which is like younger idea. It's based on based on clustering and centroids, so vectors. So it's like ANN is implemented differently, not graph like in as in HNSW, but basically quickly understand which centroids of clusters are closer to our vector, and then work with those clusters. Quite simple idea actually, but I guess there are many complexities in implementation there.
Yeah. Well, and it's cheap, right? Being on S3.
Oh yes, and slow. But they have TurboPython. I guess they have additional layer to cache on regular disks closer to database.
Maybe,
So
yeah.
there is caching layer, of course. Yeah, but it's much cheaper, much.
Yeah.
Actually, this is another area. If you have hundreds of terabytes of data, tiering of storage in Postgres is still not fully solved problem. Right.
Well, unless you shard, right? And this
It's
was
super
like
expensive
the
to
Notion
shard and keep everything on disks, especially if there is some archive data which you touch very rarely. I would prefer to have it on S3. And
Yeah,
Timescale
interesting.
Cloud, Tiger Data, they solved it in their solution. We also had attempt to solve it from Tembo, which is not Postgres company anymore.
Yeah.
Right, PGT, right? It was called, but this is I think this should be like more and more needed over time.
Well, and it's a side effect of the crunch data approach of putting things in Iceberg. That also solves the problem, right? You can archive the data from Postgres at that point. So it's a similar solution, isn't it?
So I guess these days I would explore S3 vectors at this point if I needed to. Maybe I will actually.
Well, you are going to need to. It sounds like.
Well, yeah. Postgres AI infrastructure mostly is on Cloud SQL. Oh, not Cloud SQL. Google Cloud. Not Cloud SQL. No. That was wrong. Google Cloud. So
one level up.
Yeah. But S3 is AWS, so but it's really interesting. Should be cheap, should be interesting to explore.
Yeah.
And it's a big challenge to Postgres ecosystem.
Yeah.
Or maybe opportunity if somebody creates a foreign data wrappers or something.
Yeah.
Right? It's actually, why not? It should be. It's a good project, by the way, right? So interface. There is foreign data wrapper to S3 already, right?
I think so. I think super.
So
I don't know. I'll check.
Should be just extended to have vector functions, in my opinion. Okay, enough. It's kind of brainstorm mode already. Thank you so much. See you next week.
Thanks, and catch you next week.
Yeah, bye-bye.